object-based learning. Thank you. Leen Rieth is Object-Based Learning Coordinator at University of Sydney Library, working with items from the library's rare books and special collections. They've also worked as an academic liaison librarian at University of Sydney and University of Melbourne, supporting the humanities and the visual and performing arts respectively. Leen is completing a practice-led PhD at UNSW in Art, Design and Architecture, which is about transgender experience, institutional narratives and arts organising, by drawing parallels between autonomy and self-determination, perception and shared realities, and affirmation and futurity. Amazing work. Leen, let's have a look and see if we can see your screen. See if we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Am I ready for screen sharing? I should be able to do that.
Yes, hopefully Ellen has enabled you as a co-host.
I think I have, yes.
Yep, it's coming up now.
Well done. Woohoo!
All right.
It's just a matter of which screen can you see? Can you just see this presentation?
No, we can see your notes.
No, that's annoying. Okay. I'm going to stop for a second and then start again. I wonder why that is.
This is Zoom.
I think it's doing the same thing again, right?
It is, yes.
Wait, what if I go like this?
That's it. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
It's just it will now not look like I'm reading to you because I'm on this screen.
That's okay.
But yes, I'm not ignoring you. I'm very aware. Okay, so before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land where I live and work. So where I live, but also University of Sydney campus in Camperdown, which is on Gadigal land. And I extend this respect to any Gadigal elders and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I want to note especially that collections institutions, including big libraries like my library, are valuable sources of knowledge and resources, and that we as library staff have a role to play in providing access to our collections with cultural competence and ethical responsibility. Today I'll be talking a little bit about a role that I've had for a bit over a year now as Object-Based Learning Coordinator. I'm the first person to be in the role as well, so it's a new role and I'm new to it as well. So I'll be speaking from that role as well as my experience as an artist and PhD candidate. So there's a little bit of library stuff and a little bit of kind of like theoretical fun stuff as well. So just an overview of the presentation. I'll talk a little bit about what object-based learning is. I'm sure some people will be familiar with it, but I don't want to leave anyone out. I'll talk about my background in art and academic libraries, our intentions to use rare books and special collections items in education as opposed to research. So there's that divide between education and research that's quite strong within our library. I'll show some examples of how I've been winging it in terms of object-based learning sessions and discuss a little bit of, I guess, proposals that we're working on about how to integrate object-based learning as a service in the library. Okay, so in its simplest form, object-based learning involves direct engagement with artifacts, artworks, archival material, digitized material, and digital objects. A lot of academic work is focused on the subject and content of publications, whereas object-based learning focuses on the premise that in addition to the subject and content, there's knowledge embedded in the physical publication or object itself that can lead us to consider things like historical, geographical, and publishing contexts. Looking critical at context is a way of contributing to our understanding of a particular topic. So object-based learning involves direct engagement with objects to understand their make and materials. This is a chance for students to develop their skills in working hands-on with primary source materials, to consider the visual and tactile forms of communication there. Students are involved in discussions on the provenance of objects to learn about and critique authorship, historical canons, and knowledge sharing. This is an opportunity for students to compare and contrast narratives and different histories within their academic arguments. Object-based learning is an opportunity to consider the value and significance of objects as well within historical situations and also present-day contexts, which can broaden students' awareness of kind of overlapping ideas and subjectivities and develop students' academic and ethical judgments. And it creates situations for peer-to-peer learning. Most OBL sessions happen in groups, so students can develop their collaboration and interpersonal skills and their communication skills. It also means they're likely to, in those conversations, meet each other in not necessarily arguments, but to have kind of competing ideas with their peers in their cohort. And through these outcomes, object-based learning motivates students to challenge their own assumptions and be critical of dominant narratives and voices, which motivates students to explore new hypotheses. These concepts will probably sound very familiar to you as art librarians because many of these methods of learning are quite similar to the way that artists learn. In the library, part of my role is to lead classes in object-based learning, which are tailored to the needs of units of study and in consultation with the academics who are running those units. My role is to select appropriate materials as well as construct activities. And at this early stage, the majority of the work I've been doing is setting up workflows for object-based learning, as in internal workflows, figuring out which staff I need to speak with and how we can make particular kinds of classes happen, as well as doing outreach to the university, letting them know that this service is available and that I exist and that I can help them. We have some exciting opportunities to teach into units of study starting next year. A little bit of information about rare books and special collections, like a kind of one big collection. So there's about 56,000 books printed in Europe between the 15th century and 1801. The 19th and early 20th century material that we have on Australian literary and historical works is quite important. There's an emphasis on New South Wales publication specifically. There's historical works on occult sciences, demonology and witchcraft. There's historical scientific works about the pure sciences, astronomy and thermodynamics, early American, Asian, New Zealand, Pacific Island and USSR publications. And we also have some quite large collections of comics, science fiction, fantasy, detective fictions as well. We also have religious manuscripts, and that's just kind of breaking the ice. So that's the rare books and special collections that I'm working with and will continue to work with. By introducing object-based learning into the library, we hope to support academic staff to use items from those collections within their curriculum. We want to encourage undergraduate students to visit rare books. Rare books is mostly used by researchers, and we'd love to have a greater breadth of our community coming in to use the items. We also want to identify items for digitization projects, so potentially digitizing items to be used online for object-based learning online, or especially asynchronously. And we'd like to create opportunities for other kinds of online learning using our new virtual teaching space, which I'll mention in a little bit more detail later. We'd also like to partner with other collections institutions and university faculties and potentially our extended library community. So a little bit about me, I guess, and how I've come into this role. So my interest in teaching with rare books has emerged through my artistic practice and my experiences in academia. Throughout my education at art school, I've grown increasingly aware of the significance of working with materials, including primary source materials, as entry points to meaningful learning and research. I'm 6 months away from submitting my PhD, which is a practice-led thesis that emphasizes the practical components of creative research. I learn and teach best when working with and speaking about materials, objects, their uses, and their meanings. However, these methods of learning and research are generally deprioritized in academic and mainstream teaching contexts where education is focused on rote learning, binary logics, and ways of thinking and doing that are abstracted from lived experience. For these reasons, I'm very surprised that I've managed to pursue a career in academic spaces so far. At the beginning of becoming a librarian, I primarily was studying it because I wanted employment. The life of a casual tutor in the visual arts isn't sustainable. When I started studying, When I started studying librarianship, I was aiming to work in archives because I wanted to do that kind of hands-on work. But during my grad dip in information science, I was offered a job in an academic library at the Victorian College of the Arts at University of Melbourne, and my life took a very different turn. Around the same time, I was finding that the content of my degree, the library degree, was dry and quite literal, and the style of learning was kind of hurting my brain a little bit. And then I read this thesis written by Margaret Blackmore, whose research demonstrated how artists find and use information by refining their senses in looking, touching, and working directly in contact with materials. And also around the same time, I attended an Art Libraries Australia and New Zealand conference, where I heard librarians speak about the unique ways that artists learn, research, and teach. And I felt a real sense of gratitude that there's librarians revealing the integrity of creative practice within academic spaces, and I wanted to be involved. And also Arts West opened at University of Melbourne within the same year, and their object-based learning program and object-based learning spaces were really exciting to me because I could see that OBL is a method of teaching that fit better with the ways that I learn and teach and research that come naturally to me. And I guess it also gave some integrity to the ways that I learn, teach, and research. However, the sunshine and my artistic practice were calling me. So I moved to Sydney to begin my PhD thesis and invested more time in refining my own research practices. A couple of years later, I was successfully employed at University of Sydney Library, where sorry, I lost my place because there's some notifications on the screen. Yeah, I started working at University of Sydney Library as an academic librarian supporting the humanities. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, my division of the library underwent a lot of organizational structural change, which resulted in the establishment of new roles, one of them being object-based learning coordinator. So based on my experience in teaching and research focused on the material world, I was a successful candidate. And I've been responsible for establishing the service, connecting with stakeholders, and running classes. And I now have the privilege to work with our excellent rare books and special collections alongside librarians who share similar values as me. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to encourage a way of learning that I really believe in. As an artist and practice-led research postgraduate student, and someone who has taught art theory and studio practice, I wholeheartedly believe in trusting in the process, and I found that being comfortable with winging it has become a key aspect of my role as object-based learning coordinator. But I haven't really had much chance to do this before in my library work. As an academic liaison librarian, I felt quite restricted and had to behave in quite an orderly way. And service delivery has involved kind of striking a balance between delivering services that are uniform and cohesive to all disciplines, whilst also offering flexibility and adaptability to specific needs. I'm curious about how object-based learning could integrate into other services we offer, or how it may need to continue to function outside of the other services that we offer. And to play with this conundrum, I found myself reaching for the book, What's the Use? On the Uses of Use by Sarah Ahmed. Published in 2019, this book discusses the many ways that we use or might use something, and it demonstrates how a use case analysis can be applied not just to things, but also systems, institutions, and concepts. Using something can tell us a lot about how that thing is being used or perhaps not being used. Ahmed also raises the issue of alternative use, that is, uses that were not originally intended. So when the world is not used to you, when you appear as unusual, use becomes what you question. This is what I experience when thinking about object-based learning and my own methods of working within the context of my work environment. I find it interesting that a difference between library and art collections often comes down to use. Most libraries exist for the purpose of use and often have very intentional aims around providing access to as many people as possible. Art galleries also aim for artworks to be used. However, gatekeeping limits access to the items. Does this divergence occur because books are often published in multiple, whereas many artworks are distinct and unique? How do we account for rare books in this scenario? While books may be produced in multiple, their individual journeys and their individual uses give them unique and special qualities worthy of collection, preservation, and mediated access. Using them makes them special. And after attending the Bibliographical Society conference on embellishments and marginalia earlier this week, I can confirm that using books is intimate and using books is social too. I started reading What's the Use in late 2019 and early 2020. My friends and I had organized a reading group for the book, which started out as an in-person monthly meeting at Front Yard, which is a not only artist-run space in Marrickville. And then because of the lockdowns, it became an online reading group. While we were sad not to meet in person, changing the method of access affected attendance and location, and even took on a new social aspect, especially because we were isolated. And here's an example of my own experiences of encountering our rare books before I had the experience of working more closely with them. Ahmed compares an institution to a well-worn garment. It has acquired the shape of those who tend to wear it, such that it is easier to wear if you have that shape. Unintended or anticipated use of items could potentially change who fits. One of the few times that I felt at home in the library was on level 1 in rare books, where I was assisting a colleague to change over a display in the rare books reading room. This was when I was still working as an academic liaison librarian there. So I was just kind of volunteering to assist to change a display in the rare books reading room. We were there with the rare books librarian, and I was removing a little set of books from a display cabinet. There were 3 books that had the same binding, and then there were 2 that kind of matched as the set, but were also kind of slightly different. I asked the rare books librarian about what that was about. And she took the books from my hand and she just kind of said, like, queer little things, aren't they? And that was the first time, and possibly the only time at work where I'd heard the word queer to mean something interesting, something to be explored or even celebrated, rather than its common use at work, which is in terms of diversity work, referring to people with marginalized genders and sexualities. This comment about these queer little things rearranged my relationship to the notion of what my workplace could be. And once again, being an artist, this revelation came via serendipity, a willingness to collaborate and get amongst the process and learn new skills. So within this context, where I know and have experienced the usefulness of rare books, but not quite known how to get them into the hands of students, what does winging it look like? Earlier this year, I arranged a seeding event. We don't really know what else to call it. I guess the idea was that we were kind of planting some seeds for interest in the rare books and special collections. And it was specifically for academics and postgraduate students from the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre, which is a centre within the university. Originally, I was going to present a handful of items to do some kind of close looking, but upon viewing the quantity and range of resources available in the collection, I selected over 200 items for the event. Browsing the collection is a privilege for very few of us, and I wanted to pass on that experience of browsing and discovery to people at the event. I arranged most of the items as if they were on shelves so that attendees could browse the titles, as you would with a general collection. I also grouped the items under the 5 research areas of the centre, which are economic and social development, environment and resources, health, heritage and the arts, and state and society. By grouping the items under these headings, staff who worked in different faculties were intermingling and meeting colleagues with similar interests. And this encouraged that interdisciplinarity and peer-to-peer engagement. I created a sixth category as well called Voyages and Maps, which didn't fit within any of the research areas, but it was a very important collection of journals spanning centuries of colonial occupation in Southeast Asia. I received very positive feedback on the event, and attendees were engaged by the material, and in some cases like virtually glued to specific items that were available to browse. That said, this event hasn't yet led to any object-based learning classes. I love showing the collection in this way because it was such a unique experience and a great way for me to get to know the collection and for a group of academics and students to get to know the collection. But at this stage, I've kind of resolved to take a different approach, which is to do more limited and targeted items and activities. Another example of winging it is our virtual teaching space. So the library is currently piloting a virtual reading room service. This involves using an overhead camera to look at selected items from rare books and special collections in real time. Clients can book an appointment and an item, and then a librarian will make that item available and interact with that item via Zoom on behalf of the client who's watching via the camera. So this pilot has opened us up to the opportunity of a virtual teaching space as well. Similar to the reading room, items from the collection can be viewed via Zoom. And in this setup, teaching staff and library staff can look at and interact with an object in real time with an online classroom of students. This is an example of the virtual teaching space. So we have Doru Kostash here, who is the recipient of the Selby Old Fellowship this year, in the front, and supported by Kim Williams, who is one of our digital collection staff. They're looking at the Codex Angus with a class of students online. So Doru's set up with his laptop where the students can see him, and he also can see them and present his slides. And then from the other angle, you can see Kim has the Codex Angus here and the overhead camera as well, showing onto the book. And then Kim is also logged into the Zoom meeting separately so that the book can be shown on screen as well. So the students can see the teacher and the presentation and the book all at the same time. We're also moving towards a model of formalizing the service rather than winging it. Last year, the library rolled out a tiered service model for learning experiences to provide a more targeted education to students and staff. I won't go into it too much, but just to kind of give some general context. So there's kind of a university-wide tier that's designed for all disciplines, learning experiences that will work for everyone. And then faculty or subject-specific learning experiences that we would be that are still kind of a bit general, but we're thinking things like, you know, a database that might be specific to a faculty rather than to everyone in the university. And then bespoke partnerships, which is to design learning experiences that are specifically for a particular unit of study. And they kind of also need to be directly related to assessment items and learning outcomes. So this is the kind of potential new part of the service model, engagement, which would include object-based learning alongside other services like our ThinkSpace, which provides students with technologies like 3D printing that they can kind of engage with and learn and use. So these services are exploratory at present, and they don't require any kind of relationship to core units of study or particular partnerships for information and digital literacy assessment aspects. But we would really like it if they did. We'd welcome working to meet requirements of learning outcomes. And OBL is particularly useful for learning outcomes around kind of collaboration and that contextual thinking. And yeah, we'd love to fit it in with core units where we possibly can. So I've been in the role for a bit over a year now, and progress has been slow. At the beginning of her book, Ahmed comments that the more a path is used, the more a path is used. Progression is easier along previously used paths. I've included a few examples from the book. It's interesting, she has maybe 10 different images that she uses and reuses throughout the book with different captions as she explores the different meanings that exist in relation to kind of her theories, I guess. Yeah, so I've used a few examples of the way that she's used an image of a pathway of originally stating the more a path is used, the more a path is used. I'd like to note that Chow Chak Wing Museum, which is part of the university and located directly next to the Fisher Library, has been working in the object-based learning space at the university for a couple of years now. And it has some quite established relationships with different units throughout the university in different faculties. In the library, we're still building those connections, but the Chow Chak Wing Museum has in some ways created pathways that we can also use in the library. I do think that we have an extra hurdle as well, which is that books dominate our collection, obviously, as a library, and the way how we interpret the use of books to learn is quite different to how we might consider the use of a museum item to learn. So while our rare books and special collections are shaped by their pathways of their past, which is their use in research contexts, and thus points to a specific future, which is to continue to be used primarily in research contexts, changing the university's relationship to the collection via the object-based learning service will hopefully create new pathways to access methods of teaching and learning to many students, especially creative thinkers, which I think they will really value and identify with. These are ideas that I'm putting into use, passing around in places like this conference, and hopefully affecting how we might work with our collections in the future. Thank you.